Hi, I'm Elizabeth, this is the Bookish North, and today I'm doing another weekly reading video, although these haven't exactly been weekly lately. Last week I made a book haul, mainly because I hadn't been reading much that week, but this week I'm going to wrap up the last 2 weeks. And I have been reading a lot more this week, partly because I've joined a Norwegian reading initiative called Hele Norge leser, or All of Norway is Reading. It is basically a web page where you put in what you are reading every day, and the goal is just that, to read a little bit every day. It is actually a competition, though I'm not focusing too much on that aspect of it, but you get 1 point if you read 10 pages or listen to 10 minutes of an audiobook. You get 2 points for 20 pages or 20 minutes, and then you get 3 points for 50 pages or 50 minutes. And my aim is that I want 3 points every single day for the duration of the competition, which started on October the 4th and it's going on until the end of the year, the 31st of December. And so far we are 9 days in, and I do have the maximum amount of points, or at least I will have when I finish this video and get to read the last 8 pages I'm lacking for today to make the 50. So that means that I have been reading more this week, and I'm using this as a motivation to read more. And the way it works for me, this motivational thing, is that it has put reading 50 pages a day onto my to-do list, and that makes it actually be a priority for me, so it works out. But yeah, last week I only finished 1 book, and it is the book I mentioned in my haul last week as well. It is a new Norwegian release called Udyr, or Beasts, by Kristine Tofte. This is middle grade fantasy. It's about a teenage boy called Amund who gets to be caretaker for some animals on a farm. He's a bit skeptical about this because he doesn't really know anything about animals. And then a girl from his class called Ida shows up to help him as well. And it turns out that these animals are special. They are, in fact, the animals left behind by the Norse gods when they fled for Christianity. And these animals have been living on this farm for 1,000 years. But just this weekend, where Amund is taking care of them, some people are coming to harm them, and Amund and Ida are trying to save the animals and help them survive this attack from the outside. And this was a very, very entertaining story. It's fast-paced, action-packed, it's very inventive. I really love how she has played with the old mythical stories and created something entirely new from it, and still she manages to show respect and love for the old stories as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed this, and if you are able to read Norwegian, I would recommend it. If not, I would recommend you nag someone to translate it into a language you can read, because this was a joy to read, even if I'm not in the appropriate age group. I'm a bit older than middle grade, but I mean, I enjoyed it. The next book I finished was my audiobook pick for the last week and a half. And it was neither fun to read nor enjoyable, but it was still a very good book. It was Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir about her upbringing in a very religious, well, a fanatical religious family that are also doomsday preppers, and she has a very strange childhood where all the information she gets is skewed into their particular worldview. She is in theory homeschooled, but in reality there's not much schooling going on. But at a certain age she decides she wants to go to school, and she takes the admissions exams and is accepted at a college. And we follow her journey through, well, both her upbringing and then through her education, and how she gets this thirst for knowledge and for seeing the world in a completely different way than she has brought up to see it. And the reason I say this is not an enjoyable read is because there are some fairly gruesome stuff happening in here. There is a lot of neglect, but there's also just downright abusive things going on. There's a lot of horrific scenes that are brutal, some of them on purpose, some are mere accidents, but these accidents happen through, carelessness and neglect, as I've already said. And this book made me so angry and irritated and annoyed to read at times, because it is just so many irrational things going on, and there are things that are just not just irrational, but downright mean and abusive. And yeah, not a joy to read, but still an important book to read, because I have lived a very, very sheltered life, and I think it's good for me to read stories from other kinds of communities, because these are things that I wouldn't believe happening, but she has sort of grown up. She's about my age. This has happened in my lifetime. It feels hard to acknowledge that or believe that somehow, but it's a book that's going to stay with me for a while. It certainly provoked a lot of emotional reactions, and it was also sort of an inspirational story to see what she managed to achieve with the background she had, and how much drive and thirst for knowledge how much that can pull you forward, and how ambition can actually make you achieve things that seemed impossible when you started out. So yeah, both inspirational and scary and all of the things. I would recommend it, but you have to be aware that it is a fairly brutal story, and there are some really visceral scenes in there. That's not easy reading, I will say that much. And then finally I finished another book yesterday, and it was my most anticipated release of the year, A Little Hatred by Jo Abercrombie. And this is a hard book for me to talk about, both because it is book, is it 7 or 8 in a series, sort of, but it's also because when it comes to Jo Abercrombie and his The First Law universe, I'm just a big fangirl, and I don't think I'm capable of critical thinking around these books by now. The series consists of first a trilogy called the First Law trilogy, then you had 3 sequels that are all standalone novels called Best Served Cold, Heroes and Red Country, and then there was also a short story collection called Sharp Ends. And then this one is the first book in a new trilogy set in the same universe, but this is set, I'm not sure if it's 20 or 30 years after the events of the previous books. So the people we followed in the previous books are in here sort of the parent generation, and we now follow children of some of the major players from the previous books, and also brand new characters. But a lot of the people we already know show up in sort of minor roles, or show up in here, but they are now like in their 50s and 60s, and there are other people propelling the story forwards. Another change that has happened is that now this world and Adua, which is the capital of the Union, which is sort of the center of the civilized world in this story, is now on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. So factories are popping out everywhere. The early stages of capitalism is apparent. There are investors and inventors, and there's just a lot of stuff happening. And you also have the working class appearing as a unit and trying to fight for livable conditions in this world that is rapidly changing. And this is one of the things I've heard Abercrombie talk about when he talks about this book, is that he is drawn to these transitional periods in history, because there's a lot of fantasy written in sort of medieval times at a stable time where you have to sort of create all the tension in the story itself. But when you use a period in history like this, there's just a lot of drama in sort of just like the scenery, and it makes it an interesting read. Another thing that is somewhat different about this book than from his previous works is that nearly all of the major players in this story are female. And you know, that shouldn't be a surprise that that was possible. And you know, Abercrombie himself has been criticized before because there has been too few and not very interesting female characters in his book, but he certainly has done a turnaround in this. There are a lot of female protagonists that are really driving this story forward. Two of them, the two main characters I would say of this book, is called Savine and Rikke. Both of them are daughters of major players in earlier books, and both of them are a joy to get to know. They're not necessarily all nice people. There really aren't any all nice people in Abercrombie's books, but they are certainly interesting and they have personalities. And I think in this book, more than in his previous works, they're not just all gimmick and punchlines. They have more going for them than that, and they actually react to things and are changed by things happening in this novel in a way that I haven't really seen with his characters a lot in his previous works. So that I enjoyed. I also liked the story going on in here. There is a lot of drama, it's well paced, well plotted, and there's a lot of just snappy dialogue as usual in an Abercrombie novel, and I loved it. It was great. I also think that this is slightly less dark than some of his previous works. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't really end well for all of the characters because they all have conflicting interests and it's impossible for it to end well for all of them. And there are a lot of brutal things going on. There's a lot of mud and cynical things, and it's not a rosy story in any ways. But in this one there are just glimmers of happiness and people having a good time, and they might be short and they might be a bit longer. But I mean, just the thing, like, there are people in this book having sex and actually enjoying it, and not being interrupted by assassins or kidnappers or just some stupid acts of some of the people involved. I mean, that alone makes it a more hopeful book than the rest. And I'm not saying it's going to be happily ever after for these characters, because I'm sure it won't. But maybe, just maybe, for some of them. So yeah, I did enjoy this very much. It was exactly what I hoped it would be. And now I just have another year to wait for the next book in this trilogy to appear in a shop near me. And then I've also picked back up again The Door by Magda Szabo. I am about halfway through, a bit more by now. I'm enjoying this as well, but I'm going to talk more about that when I've actually finished it, which will hopefully happen this week. And then I've also been reading a bit more in my book about Ashurbanipal. I'm reading like a chapter here and a chapter there of this one. It is super interesting, but it's also very big and very heavy, and I can only read it sitting down in my comfy chair, because this is not a book to bring on my commute. So that was my reading week. I hope you've had a good reading week as well, and I will talk to you next week. Bye bye.